I really like the Retroid Pocket Mini, but it's not perfect. It does have its flaws. The main one is the buttons are too loud. That's the one I see pop up everywhere. And the other one is that the screen isn't bigger, but personally, I think the screen is fine for what I want to play on it. But back to the buttons. The buttons are pretty loud, and this is something that people complain about pretty much everywhere. I see it on Discord, I see it on comments, I see it in other people's videos, but there is a way to fix it. Now, before I talk about fixing it, let me just say this isn't going to be everybody. I know there's going to be a good amount of people that think the buttons are fine. That's perfectly valid. If you like the buttons as is, have fun. You don't have to do anything to it. That's it. You're pretty much done. Go play some games. But if you do think they're too loud, like I do, there is a fix for it, and it's not that complicated. It's just, it might look a little bit janky, but trust me, in the end, you won't even notice it, and it's going to work a lot better, and they're going to be way quieter. So before we get into the actual modding part, let me show you a little comparison with how they were before, after, and with another handheld from Ambernick, because they usually have pretty quiet buttons. So let's go take a look at that. First up, what they sound like before, and this is straight from my camera mic with no adjustments, filters, nothing like that. And here it is after I went ahead and did the mod. And finally, just for comparison, here is the 506V. Okay, so let's get this done. And you're gonna need a couple tools. First up, you're gonna need a pry tool. You're also gonna need a Phillips head screwdriver. Something to measure. A ruler works just fine, but anything that'll give you millimeters, because we are gonna make some small cuts. And finally, a box cutter or any really sharp knife you have. Once you have all of that, make sure you set up somewhere where it's nice and bright and that there's no clutter around so you don't lose anything. To get into the Mini, it's pretty easy. You just have to take off 4 screws and then pop the back off. Once all 4 screws are done, you're going to go ahead and take your pry tool and you're going to pop the back off. And don't worry if the trigger cover flies off, that is fine. They come off. I forgot to take it off here and it kind of surprised me, but it's not a big deal. Just make sure you don't lose it. Now, the back cover is on there pretty good. The little latch is on there, keep it pretty tight. So you are going to feel like you have to pry a little bit harder than what you would expect. Don't worry, it's not going to break. It's going to be fine. Just work it in there and make sure you go all the way around and pop it off. All right, once it's off, we got to remove a couple more screws, but just in case your trigger cover didn't just come flying off, go ahead and remove it now because it is covering one of the screws that we need to take out. Also, don't forget to take the stick cap off because it is going to be in the way as well. With all that stuff out of the way, we have 4 more screws we need to remove, and there's also a speaker here that you can take out if you want to. It's completely optional. It doesn't really get in the way except for that cable a little bit. I didn't bother with it because I don't want to take off more things than I really need to. Once those screws are off, go ahead and remove the cover, and next up we need to take the analog stick out. Now you could take out all 4 screws, but personally I just disconnect the ribbon cable and I'll take out the 2 that are on the housing and just pull it out that way. Once we have that analog stick out, we just have to take the daughter board out, and all you have to do for this part is just disconnect the 2 ribbon cables and just pull it right out. Once all that stuff is out of the way, we finally have access to the rubber membrane, which is what we're going to be working on. Now, I already did it with mine, so I can't exactly show you exactly what you need to cut down, but basically all we're doing is taking this and making the little pressure pads a little bit shorter. Now, if you go too far, don't worry because you can just put some tape underneath the buttons to lift them up a little bit more and just kind of get that perfect height because you are going to want to find that sweet spot. Unfortunately, we can't do this with the buttons because the lip is way too thin. So if you do shave this part down, the buttons are just going to fall right out. But essentially all we're doing is trying to make that area that pushes against the shell a little bit shorter by making those membranes a little bit, well, shorter. As you can see when you look at the rubber membrane, there's going to be a hollow area, which is the part that actually depresses, and then there is a solid top, which is the one that pushes against the button. All we're trying to do is get that pad down to about 1 millimeter of thickness, and that's about it. That's where the ruler comes in so you can get that measurement. And I forgot to mention a pen or a Sharpie or anything to get a little marking on there so that you know where to cut. It makes it a lot easier. That way all the pads are roughly the same height. And like I said earlier, if you cut a little too much, it's okay. Just put a layer of tape or maybe two, depending on how far you went, to get that little Goldilocks area so that the buttons aren't smashing and they're way quieter. Here's an extra tip. If you feel like L1 and R1 are just a little bit louder than you want them to be, you can put some tape over the dome switches, and that's going to dampen down that sound while still keeping that nice little clicky feel whenever you press them down. Now back to the pads though, you will probably have to put them on and take them off a couple times just to get that right height. If you want to, maybe cut them a little bit taller, maybe 1.5 millimeters. I know those are tiny little amounts, but it makes a huge difference when you're dealing with spaces that are this small. I mean, just remember, if you do go a little bit too short, you can just put some tape or maybe some little cardboard cutouts or whatever you want to bring those buttons back up just a little bit. As long as you're staying between 1 and 2 millimeters from that solid pad, you're going to be perfectly fine. So that's pretty much the whole mod. It's not that crazy. All we're really doing is taking the membranes and making them a little bit shorter, because that's really the only part that you can take materials off of. If you try it on the buttons, then they're just gonna fall out. So that's pretty much it. I hope this video was helpful, and if you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Now the video will run for a little bit longer, but all I'm really going to be doing is playing some Street Fighter in case you wanted to see how the in case you wanted to listen to what the buttons really sound like when you're playing a game. But that's it. I hope you liked the video. I'll see you in the next one.